There is a quiet epidemic happening in modern life, one that doesn't make headlines, yet defines an entire generation of men. More and more men are staying single for years, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. Some live comfortably in solitude, while others carry an invisible loneliness that they can't quite explain. Society tends to simplify the reasons, blaming dating apps, career focus, or fear of commitment. But the truth, as psychology reveals, runs much deeper. Behind the growing wave of long-term male singleness lies a web of emotional conditioning, identity struggles, and hidden psychological conflicts that shape how men experience love, intimacy, and connection. To understand why so many men remain single, we must start with the way boys are raised to relate to emotion. From a young age, men are taught to suppress vulnerability. They learn that showing sadness, fear, or dependency is weakness. Over time, this emotional conditioning solidifies into a quiet armor, one that keeps them functional but distant. When adulthood arrives and relationships demand openness, many men simply don't have the emotional vocabulary to express what they feel. They may crave connection, yet fear the exposure it requires. So they retreat into the safety of solitude, calling it independence. Carl Jung would describe this as the imbalance between the masculine and the feminine within the psyche. Every person, regardless of gender, carries both principles: logic and emotion, control and surrender. When one side dominates, the psyche becomes rigid. Many men grow up over-identifying with the masculine side: discipline, order, rationality, while suppressing the receptive, feeling side. In relationships, this imbalance shows up as emotional detachment, fear of vulnerability, and an inability to communicate deeper needs. They become comfortable being alone not because they don't desire love, but because love threatens to awaken parts of themselves they've kept buried. But emotional repression isn't the only factor. Modern dating culture has amplified psychological barriers that already existed. In the digital age, choice overload and instant gratification have changed how people connect. For men, especially those who are analytical or introverted, this environment can feel disorienting. Swiping, competing, and performing create a sense of emotional fatigue. Rejection becomes constant background noise. Over time, many men develop what psychologists call learned helplessness, a conditioned belief that effort no longer leads to meaningful results. They stop trying, not out of arrogance, but out of quiet exhaustion. It's easier to stay single than to navigate a game that feels unwinnable. Another key factor is the rise of self-sufficiency. In previous generations, men were socially and economically expected to marry. Today, autonomy is celebrated. Men can build careers, travel, and design their lives without social penalty. But independence, while empowering, can morph into isolation. The longer someone lives without emotional interdependence, the more the brain normalizes solitude. Habits of self-containment become subconscious. Freedom turns into avoidance. Psychologists call this adaptive preference formation, when people adjust their desires to match what they can comfortably maintain. A man who's been alone for years may convince himself he prefers it, when in truth, it's simply what feels safe. Then comes the influence of past relationships. For many men, early heartbreak leaves psychological imprints that never fully heal. Research on emotional trauma shows that the male brain processes romantic pain differently from the female brain. Men tend to suppress, compartmentalize, and distract rather than express or seek social support. This internalization creates emotional scar tissue. Each failed relationship becomes a silent warning. Don't get too close again. The unconscious mind remembers the pain more vividly than the pleasure, so the next time intimacy threatens to deepen, the psyche hesitates. Staying single becomes an act of self-protection disguised as choice. There's also the issue of identity diffusion. In psychology, this refers to uncertainty about who you are or what you want. Many men today grow up without clear models of healthy masculinity. They're told to be sensitive but strong, humble yet confident, independent yet emotionally available. These contradictory ideals create confusion. When identity is fragmented, commitment feels risky. How can a man merge lives with someone else when he's not even sure who he is? So he waits, hoping clarity will arrive one day. But time passes, and waiting becomes a habit. At a deeper level, loneliness itself alters the psyche. Extended periods of isolation can change how the brain perceives social reward. Dopamine and oxytocin responses, the chemicals associated with bonding, begin to dull. The mind learns to rely on other forms of stimulation: work, entertainment, productivity. This neurochemical adaptation can make human connection feel less appealing, even draining. It's not that men stop wanting companionship. They simply stop finding it emotionally efficient. In a world obsessed with optimization, love starts to feel like a poor return on investment. Another powerful force is fear of judgment. Many men fear that their emotional reality won't be accepted, that if they reveal vulnerability, it will be used against them. In the early stages of dating, this fear translates into emotional minimalism: short messages, detached tone, cautious behavior. They keep their hearts behind glass, visible but unreachable. Yet this restraint, meant to protect them, often leads to misunderstandings. Potential partners interpret it as lack of interest. Rejection follows. Each failed attempt reinforces the belief that intimacy equals pain. The psyche learns that emotional distance is safer than authenticity. There's also a cultural narrative quietly shaping the modern male experience: the idea that men must constantly earn love through achievement. From early life, validation often comes from performance: grades, sports, status, success. When affection is conditional, it programs the subconscious to link love with accomplishment. So as adults, men pursue self-improvement relentlessly, hoping it will lead to connection. But when success fails to bring emotional fulfillment, disillusionment sets in. They begin to suspect that nothing they do will make them worthy enough. This feeling, known in psychology as imposter syndrome, can extend to relationships. A man may stay single, not because he doesn't want love, but because he secretly believes he doesn't deserve it. Meanwhile, women, also shaped by modern pressures, have become more self-reliant and discerning. This cultural shift has challenged traditional dating scripts. Many men feel unsure how to adapt. The behaviors that once symbolized competence, stoicism, independence, control, no longer guarantee connection. Emotional intelligence and communication now play larger roles, yet many men were never taught these skills. The result is a widening empathy gap, both genders misreading each other's needs, each retreating into frustration. Men withdraw because they feel unappreciated. Women withdraw because they feel unseen. The cycle reinforces itself, and years pass. Another subtle factor lies in social comparison. The modern man lives surrounded by curated images of relationships online: smiling couples, perfect vacations, endless validation loops. Subconsciously, these images distort expectations. Men compare their internal chaos to others' external harmony and conclude they're behind. This gap creates self-discrepancy anxiety, a psychological discomfort that makes them feel inadequate. To escape that feeling, they disengage from dating altogether. They tell themselves they're focusing on goals, when in truth, they're protecting self-esteem. In evolutionary psychology, men's mating behavior is often linked to competition and resource display. But today's social environment blurs those instincts. Success is no longer a clear pathway to attraction. Emotional presence is. Yet, emotional presence can't be faked or performed. It must be developed. Men who haven't explored their inner world find themselves unequipped for the emotional complexity modern relationships demand. So they retreat into areas where they feel competent: career, hobbies, personal growth. The external world becomes their safe domain. The inner world remains locked. Carl Jung might say that such men are caught in the tension between the persona and the shadow. The persona wants to appear composed, confident, and desirable. The shadow, however, holds the fear of rejection, inadequacy, and failure. The greater the distance between these two, the more psychological energy it takes to maintain the facade. Over time, this energy drain leads to apathy. The man stops engaging not because he doesn't care, but because he's tired of performing. Singleness then becomes a psychological equilibrium, a way to conserve energy by avoiding the theater of self-presentation. But beneath that calm exterior often lies unprocessed grief. Many men grieve silently for the relationships that never happened, for the versions of themselves they lost trying to please others, for the emotional freedom they were never taught to express. This grief manifests as cynicism, humor, or indifference. They joke about staying single forever, masking sorrow with sarcasm, yet deep down, the soul still longs for connection. Jung believed that such repression eventually erupts in the form of depression, existential fatigue, or obsessive work habits. What appears as content bachelorhood may actually be emotional numbness. Psychologists studying long-term singleness among men often note another pattern: avoidant attachment. This style develops when early emotional needs are inconsistently met. The child learns to rely solely on himself, equating closeness with risk. As adults, avoidant men crave intimacy, but sabotage it once it becomes real. They seek perfection, overanalyze flaws, or withdraw after vulnerability. These defenses keep them safe, but also alone. Healing requires conscious reprogramming, redefining intimacy not as loss of control, but as shared trust. Interestingly, solitude isn't always negative. Jung believed solitude could be transformative if used for self-integration. Some men stay single because they are undergoing deep psychological individuation, learning who they truly are apart from societal roles. They withdraw not from fear, but from self-discovery. For these men, singlehood is a sacred pause, a time to confront the unconscious and realign their values. However, even this spiritual solitude can turn stagnant if it becomes permanent avoidance. Growth requires returning to connection eventually, because the self is never complete in isolation. In recent years, research has also shown that men experience higher emotional dependence on romantic partners than commonly assumed. When a man finally bonds deeply, that relationship often becomes his primary emotional outlet. Losing it can feel catastrophic. So after heartbreak, many men unconsciously avoid future relationships to protect themselves from that collapse. They may even tell themselves they prefer casual connections, but beneath the surface, it's trauma avoidance. The heart remembers the burn, and the ego builds walls. The problem is, walls don't just keep pain out, they keep love out too. Over time, emotional isolation reshapes perception. A man begins to see intimacy not as warmth, but as danger. He convinces himself that peace lies in detachment. But psychology tells us otherwise. Chronic emotional suppression activates the body's stress systems, leading to fatigue, irritability, and a dull ache that no amount of distraction can soothe. Solitude becomes comfortable, but never fulfilling. So, what can men do to break the pattern? The answer isn't found in dating strategies or social media advice. It begins with self-awareness. Jung said that what we deny within ourselves eventually controls us from the shadows. For a man who's been single for years, the first step isn't finding someone, it's finding himself. He must ask, what am I protecting? What am I afraid to feel? Because behind the walls of solitude often lies a wounded boy, waiting to be acknowledged. Healing that inner child restores the capacity to connect authentically. Therapists often use techniques like emotional labeling, journaling, and mindfulness to help men reconnect with buried feelings. The goal isn't to become sentimental, but to become integrated, to feel without fear. Once emotions are recognized rather than repressed, intimacy stops feeling like danger. Vulnerability becomes strength, and relationships evolve from performance to partnership. Another crucial step is redefining masculinity. True strength, as modern psychology reveals, lies not in suppression, but in integration, the ability to hold fear, desire, and tenderness simultaneously. Men who embrace this balance find that their relationships deepen naturally. They no longer chase validation or fear exposure. They relate as equals, not performers. The longer a man delays this internal work, the more singlehood becomes his psychological identity. But when he begins the process of individuation, singlehood turns into transformation. It's also important to acknowledge that modern society's pace contributes to disconnection. Constant distraction, phones, work, endless content, prevents introspection. Many men stay single, not because they lack emotional depth, but because they've forgotten how to be still long enough to feel it. Solitude should be a mirror, not an escape. The mind needs silence to recognize its own patterns. When a man learns to sit with loneliness without judgment, loneliness transforms into clarity. Ultimately, the psychology of long-term male singleness reveals neither heroes nor villains. It's not about blame, it's about imbalance. The modern man stands between two worlds, one that tells him to be self-sufficient and one that asks him to be emotionally open. Navigating that paradox requires emotional literacy most were never taught. Some withdraw in confusion, others overcompensate with control. But beneath all the strategies lies the same longing, to be seen, understood, and accepted without performance. When men finally begin to explore their inner world, they discover that singlehood was never the enemy. It was the teacher. It revealed what relationships alone could not: the depth of their fear, the shape of their shadow, and the parts of themselves still waiting to be reclaimed. Jung would say that this confrontation with the self is the foundation of all genuine love. Because until a man meets his own soul, he will mistake solitude for peace and connection for threat. So why do so many men stay single for years? Because deep down, they are searching for something far greater than companionship. They are searching for themselves. The ones who learn from solitude eventually return to love with clarity and presence. They no longer seek someone to fill the void, but someone to share the space they've already made whole. In the end, the hidden psychology of male singleness is not a story of failure, but of evolution. It's the soul's attempt to grow beyond outdated definitions of manhood and into emotional authenticity. The men who embrace that journey will find that love, when it finally arrives, feels different, quieter, deeper, truer. Because it will no longer be a transaction between masks, but a meeting between two conscious hearts.